Going back to the beginning, Odo was part of a group of the 100, so named because, to learn about the galaxy, the changelings sent out 100 infants into the void with the instinct to one day return home and share their experiences with the rest of the Great Link. The implications of this are profound, because it meant that, rather than gaining experience via the link with his own people, or to have the familiar comfort of being with them, Odo emerged into consciousness with no one to tell him who or what he was, and what he was capable of. But more than that, it emerged in isolation, creating an ironic twist for his species, which preferred to exist linked with the rest of their race. Yet Odo went about his existence wanting to be separated from others. Instead of being joined in thought and experience with others of his own kind, Odo found himself collected in the Denorius Belt and brought to a lab on Bajor, where under orders from Cardassian overseers, Dr. Mora began examining to understand what it was that had been recovered. Indeed, Mora was uncertain that Odo was even a life form, hence the origin of his name, meaning unknown sample. Mora conducted a wide array of tests and procedures on the sample until Odo revealed himself as a life form, reaching out a tentacle to slap Mora's hand away to prevent another unwanted experiment. In time, Odo's abilities became clear to Mora, and to Odo himself. This early period is when Odo was, as he put it, the life of the party, shape-shifting on command to entertain people, even being renowned for something called the Cardassian neck trick. But Odo realized in time that these people were not truly his friends, only those that wanted the shapeshifter to perform tricks for them like a chimp on a tricycle. Odo struck out on his own, an outsider, and thus in a position to observe. This was probably an instinct of his people, as it would take high powers of observation to be able to mimic something else. But what changed his life and arguably saved the Alpha Quadrant was finding himself on Terok Nor, the station to later become Deep Space Nine. Odo's outsider status led him to be an impartial arbiter among Bajorans, which brought him to the attention of Gul Dukat. When a politically complicated murder took place, one that meant Dukat had to keep his distance, he asked Odo to settle the matter by finding the killer rather than the kill random people position that the Cardassian authorities would have preferred. This decision led to Odo being drawn into the station's security until he held a position of authority. This is understandable, because as the person referred to as the female changeling explained, their people have a desire for order. A consequence of their experience, they were feared and hated by those who couldn't change form, and developed fear and hatred for them in return, and so sought to dominate and impose order in order to ensure that they could no longer be harmed. This desire in them caused order to shift into authoritarianism, maintaining a status quo through fear, intimidation, and even lethal force. But what happened to Odo in his position changed that completely. His sense of order had shifted in that direction as well, believing that the Bajorans were foolishly rejecting the rule of law in a pointless gesture of resistance rather than accepting their place as a conquered people. Upholding the law and maintaining order were what mattered to Odo, until the day when the Bajoran resistance made an attack on Gul Dukat with a bomb, and Odo arrested 3 men that he thought to be responsible, based upon reports from Cardassians on the scene and the residue on the 3 men. They were publicly executed as an example. However, days later an identical bombing took place, and Odo went back and discovered all manner of evidence to explain away the circumstantial evidence, signs of contradiction in the reports, activity that said these men had nothing to do with identical bombings, and physical evidence that showed what really happened. This incident, while tragic, is vital, because it is perhaps the most defining moment of his life. Odo's attitude after this clearly changed. The drive for order was still there, certainly. Dax's pranks of moving his furniture, which continually outraged him, showed that. But order didn't lean into authoritarianism anymore. It leaned the other way, towards justice. Odo stopped his concern with the law at that point, because the law wasn't about justice. The fact that Bajorans were being exploited and brutalized showed that. In fact, weeks after the occupation ended, Odo explained this to Sisko. "Commander, laws change depending on who's making them. Cardassians one day, Federation the next. But justice is justice." The effect of this transformation was much larger than policing Terok Nor in Deep Space Nine. It would come into play when he finally returned to his people. Compelled by the implanted instinct of the changelings, Odo traveled to their homeworld and finally got the answer to all the questions that had nagged him, and was open to new possibilities. It was like a man born and raised underground by sightless creatures one day discovering the light for the first time. Everything made sense. The desire to return to where he fit was nearly impossible to resist, not because he was compelled to, but because that's what he had long been missing and desperately needed. But it was that distinction on the subject of order that would cause him to turn around and walk away. While his hidden and later revealed affection for Kira Nerys certainly played a role in this, Odo did more than just refuse to go home. He actively worked to defend Deep Space Nine and the Federation from his own people. Why? Justice. Odo knew that what the Founders were doing was a crime, not against any laws, but against the principles of right and wrong. In The Adversary, Odo was placed into the position of having to choose to allow a fellow changeling to murder innocent people, or to be the first changeling in history to harm one of his own kind. While it's true that Odo cared about his friends' lives, the depravity of this act in the eyes of his people cannot be overstated. To a changeling, it was like killing someone to stop them from shooting your pit bull. Sure, you might have affection for the pit bull, but to the person with the gun, it's short-lived, dangerous, and not as important as their own life. Justice, that all sapient life forms deserve to live, says that Odo's friends are not his pets or lesser beings whose lives cannot compare to those of changelings, and that if he must make a choice, it's to sacrifice the out-of-control killer for the sake of the victims he would otherwise have. One life lost versus the many lives saved. As a result, Odo sided against his people, because he sided against what it was that they wanted. But his desire to be with them was strong. So strong that after his repeated linking with the female changeling, the only thing that stopped him from forgetting about the conflict and just going home with her was Kira. Odo spent many years castigating the romantic pursuits of those around him, saying it's about compromises and behaving in ridiculous, irrelevant ways purely to satisfy some arbitrary rules. Since Odo is not compelled by biology, since changelings do not utilize this as a means of procreation, we can only speculate on what drove this, but it likely originated out of respect. Kira seemed like one of the people who really understood Odo. The other person, very likely, that also respects Odo is Quark. These two are the epitome of the term frenemy, in that they are quite clearly adversaries and quite clearly have a deep understanding and, though they wouldn't want the other to know it, respect. Quark is, quite clearly, a criminal, yet he is a criminal who largely confines himself to the more harmless crimes such as smuggling and acquiring items or data, or petty things like cheating his customers on gambling. The significance of this is that it makes Quark a safe sort of criminal. It's unlikely anyone is going to be physically harmed because of anything Quark does. They're unlikely to have their lives ruined because of Quark's actions. Quark is a problem for Odo because he breaks the law, and that's not something Odo can ignore, but Quark's operation is not a threat. Thus, he is a tool that Odo can use to both keep his wits sharp and also as a means to go after the much more dangerous fish that are out there. Odo doesn't approve of most of what Quark does, or of his desire for profit and material wealth, but he can appreciate the cunning the Ferengi employs and use it to keep himself on his toes. As for Kira, whatever it may have started as, we know Odo's feelings for her ran deep. The episode that probably demonstrates this the most is Children of Time, where the Defiant crew encounters a civilization of 8,000 people that are descended from themselves. Odo chooses to undo that possible future and all of those lives solely to save hers. That he did so strongly implies that he did not have any other romantic partners during the 200 years that would have transpired, since Odo clearly has not moved on from her death if he would undo that entire civilization. And the power of that attachment perhaps demonstrates more than anything how terrifyingly tempting the changeling ways are to him. They judged and condemned him because he should have chosen the one over the many. And on this world, Odo did choose the one over the many. Yet what separates him is that other changelings, including Laws, who, like Odo, was one of the 100, is that during that time he never felt he was better or grown beyond solids like they did. At the most, what we have seen when Odo was under the influence of the female changeling, he thought that he had something wonderful that they could never have or comprehend. And yet, Odo still resented the central conceit of the changelings, their claim that they were gods. After all, gods are answerable to no one, and for Odo, there is no one that can claim to be beyond justice.